The sound of laughter bounced off the wood-paneled walls as I stood at the edge of the celebration, nursing a glass of champagne I didn't really want. The warmth from the fireplace painted the luxurious ski lodge in golden hues, flickering across polished floors and designer coats. Silverpine Insurance Group's exclusive year-end party was in full swing, with Minneapolis's single-digit temperatures, making the blazing hearth all the more inviting. I'm Claire Monroe, 44, mother of 2 teenagers, stuck somewhere between caring for my aging parents and navigating the hollow spaces of my failing marriage. The HR analyst position at Silverpine had been my lifeline for 3 years. Stable, predictable, with decent benefits. Nothing spectacular, but enough to keep me afloat in the choppy waters of middle age. Claire, so glad you could make it. Janet Avery, our department head, approached with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her cashmere sweater probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Douglas was just asking about you. Douglas Grant, our silver-haired CEO, stood by the fireplace, holding court with his usual entourage. His booming laugh carried across the room as he regaled everyone with his favorite rags-to-riches story for the 100th time. I'll be sure to say hello, I replied, already planning my escape to the restroom. The invitation to this party had surprised me. 3 years at Silverpine, and this was my first inclusion in the executive celebration. When the email arrived last week, I'd stared at it in disbelief. Claire, Mr. Grant, would love for you to join the executive celebration this year. Dress code. Elegance required. I'd spent more than I could afford on a simple black dress that wouldn't embarrass me among the designer labels. Now, watching everyone network and schmooze, I wondered why I'd been included at all. The lodge was spectacular, all exposed beams, stone, and glass, with panoramic views of snow-covered pines. Outside, the night was clear and brutally cold, stars pricking the darkness above the Minnesota wilderness. Inside was warmth, abundance, and the peculiar loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't really see you. I needed air. Slipping away from a conversation about profit margins, I headed toward the massive wooden doors at the entrance. The sudden blast of frigid air was shocking but welcome after the stuffy interior. I pulled my coat tighter and stepped onto the stone pathway, breathing deeply. That's when I saw her. Huddled on a bench partially sheltered by the overhanging roof sat Sophie Delgado, my colleague from data analytics. Her thin blouse was dusted with snowflakes, her hands tucked tightly under her arms. No coat, no gloves. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge in the single-digit temperature. Sophie, I called, hurrying over. What on earth are you doing out here? She looked up, surprise and embarrassment crossing her face. Claire, I didn't expect to see you here. You're freezing, I said, already shrugging off my coat to wrap around her shoulders. How long have you been sitting out here? Sophie's teeth chattered as she answered. Not sure, maybe 45 minutes. I just wanted to drop off some cookies I made. She gestured to a small box beside her, now dusted with snow. I thought maybe I could just say hello, but she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I understood immediately. Sophie hadn't been invited, and someone had turned her away. Sophie was brilliant but quiet, the kind of employee who made everything work without drawing attention to herself. In the year since she'd joined Silverpine, I'd watched her get passed over for promotions, excluded from meetings, and assigned the worst desk in the office, all while producing exceptional work that others often took credit for. Did they not let you in? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head, eyes downcast. The staff said they were under strict instructions, invitation only. When I explained I worked for Silverpine, they called someone inside to verify, and she swallowed hard. Janet came out, said there must have been a mix-up, that the back office staff wasn't included in this particular event. Back office staff, as if Sophie were somehow less valuable than the rest of us. Through the large windows, I could see Douglas Grant raising his glass for a toast. Janet stood at his right hand, smiling broadly. The words family and team were clearly visible on his lips as he spoke to the gathered employees. Something shifted inside me, a tectonic movement of rage and clarity. For 3 years, I'd kept my head down, grateful for the paycheck, unwilling to rock the boat. But staring at Sophie's shivering form, I recognized the cruelty for what it was. Deliberate, calculated, designed to keep people like Sophie knowing their place. Come with me, I said, helping her to her feet. Claire, I can't. They already made it clear. I don't care what they made clear. My voice was steady, surprising even me. You're coming inside, like it or not. As we approached the entrance, Sophie hesitated. Maybe this isn't a good idea. I don't want to cause trouble. I looked at her. This brilliant woman reduced to apologizing for her own mistreatment, and made a decision that would change everything. The trouble was already caused, Sophie. Not by you. With her hand firmly in mine, I pushed open those heavy wooden doors with more force than necessary. The sudden gust of cold air swept into the room, causing heads to turn. The music seemed to falter. Conversations paused mid-sentence, and dozens of eyes locked onto us. Sophie in my coat, her thin blouse soaked from melted snow, and me, standing beside her with an expression I could feel burning on my face. Douglas Grant lowered his champagne glass. Janet's smile froze, then faded entirely. The silence that followed felt eternal. And then, I spoke, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. You left her in the snow. The room remained frozen, as if my words had cast a spell. Sophie's hand trembled in mine, but she stood tall beside me, chin slightly raised despite her evident discomfort. Claire, Janet recovered first, her voice honey-smooth with practiced control. This is a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should discuss this privately? A misunderstanding, I repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sophie was sitting outside in below-freezing temperatures for nearly an hour because you explicitly told the staff not to let her in. Douglas Grant cleared his throat, setting his champagne flute on the mantelpiece with deliberate care. Now, Claire, I'm sure no one intended. You left her in the snow, I repeated, the 6 words hanging in the air between us. And the security camera caught it. Those last 6 words landed like a thunderclap. Several people instinctively glanced toward the discreet cameras mounted in the corners of the lodge entrance. I hadn't planned to mention them, didn't even know if they were recording, but the reaction confirmed what I already knew. They understood the, implications. Evidence, proof, documentation of their callousness. Janet's face drained of color. Douglas tugged at his collar. From the back of the room, Marcus Reynolds from finance stood up. Quiet, observant Marcus who noticed everything but rarely spoke. She's right, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. I saw the whole thing from the window. Sophie was turned away twice, and he hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. I have emails. Janet told the planning committee specifically not to include Sophie or any of the back office staff, said it would ruin the aesthetic. Murmurs rippled through the room. Glances were exchanged. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stepped forward, drawn by the sudden shift in power. I never thought, someone began. That's the problem, I interrupted. None of us thought. Or we did, but we stayed silent. Sophie squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. I only wanted to drop off some cookies, she said, gesturing to the snow-dusted box she still clutched. To wish everyone happy holidays. The simplicity of her statement cut through the pretense. Here was a woman who had been deliberately excluded, humiliated, left to freeze, and she had still brought gifts for her colleagues. Leslie Chen from legal stepped forward, removing her cashmere wrap. Here, she said, draping it around Sophie's shoulders. Let's get you by the fire. The tableau shifted. People moved, space was made. Sophie was guided to the warmth of the hearth, offered a drink, surrounded by suddenly solicitous colleagues. I stood back watching. Douglas and Janet had retreated to a corner, heads bent in urgent conversation. Their faces told me everything I needed to know. Damage control was already underway. Bethany Rodriguez, one of our senior underwriters, appeared at my side. That took guts, she said quietly. I've watched how they treat the support staff for years. Never had the courage to say anything. Neither did I admitted. Until tonight. What made you do it now? I considered the question, searching for the catalyst. Maybe it was the contrast between the opulence around us and Sophie shivering in the cold. Maybe it was 3 years of swallowing my objections. Or maybe it was simply that at 44 I'd finally learned that silence is its own form of complicity. Because someone had to, I finally answered. The party resumed, but with a different energy. The invisible barriers between departments seemed temporarily dissolved. I watched as Sophie, now wrapped in borrowed warmth, cautiously began to engage with people who had previously looked through her. Her cookies, simple homemade sugar cookies in the shape of snowflakes, were passed around, and praised with excessive enthusiasm. Marcus made his way to me, clutching his tablet. I wasn't kidding about those emails, he said, his voice low. Janet's been systematically excluding certain employees from every company event for the past 2 years. Always the same pattern. People from departments she considers non-essential. People who don't have the right look or background or connections. Why didn't you say something before? He looked away. Same reason as everyone else, I guess. Job security, conflict avoidance, the hope that someone else would do it. His eyes met mine. Thank you for being that someone. Before I could respond, Douglas Grant appeared beside us, his CEO smile firmly back in place. Claire, Marcus, just the people I wanted to see. Such an unfortunate misunderstanding tonight. I want to assure you both that Silverpine values every single employee. What happened with Sophie was clearly a communication error, and I intend to get to the bottom of it first thing Monday morning. I stared at him, incredulous. Already, he was rewriting the narrative. A communication error, not deliberate exclusion. A mistake to be corrected, not a culture to be transformed. With all due respect, Mr. Grant, I said, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a symptom of something much deeper at Silverpine. His smile tightened. I appreciate your concern, Claire, but I think the emails show a pattern, Marcus interrupted, surprising me with his boldness. I've documented everything, and I'm not the only one who's been keeping track. Douglas's facade cracked just for a moment. Fear flickered in his eyes. Not concern for Sophie or the company culture, but fear for himself. We'll discuss this at the office, he said, voice lowered. This isn't the appropriate venue. As he walked away, I realized something fundamental had shifted. The power dynamic had been disrupted, perhaps irreparably. 6 words and the suggestion of evidence had been enough to crack the veneer. Across the room, Sophie caught my eye and smiled. A genuine smile that reached her eyes. In that moment, I knew, whatever consequences Monday might bring, I had done the right thing. And I wasn't finished yet. Monday morning arrived with a tension that hung in the air like static before a lightning strike. The Silverpine offices, usually a monotonous landscape of beige cubicles and forced smiles, seemed charged with whispers and sideways glances as I made my way to my desk. Claire. Sophie appeared beside me, a tentative smile on her face. She looked different somehow, standing straighter, her eyes meeting mine directly instead of darting away as they usually did. I brought you coffee. It's not much, but I wanted to thank you for Friday night. I accepted the cup with a grateful nod. How are you holding up? Surprisingly okay. She lowered her voice. Did you hear? Janet didn't come in today. Rumor is she's on administrative leave pending an investigation. Before I could respond, my desk phone rang. The special tone reserved for calls from the executive floor. Claire Monroe speaking. Ms. Monroe, this is Vivian from Mr. Grant's office. He'd like to see you immediately. I caught Sophie's concerned look as I hung up. Duty calls. Douglas wants to see me. Do you want me to come with you? Her offer touched me. The previously invisible employee now stepping into the light, ready to stand beside me. I've got this, I assured her, though my pounding heart suggested otherwise. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual. I'd been up here before, of course, delivering reports, attending the occasional meeting, but never summoned like this, with the weight of Friday night's confrontation hanging over me. Douglas Grant's office occupied the corner position with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Minneapolis. As I entered, I noticed he wasn't alone. A woman in a crisp charcoal suit sat in one of the visitor chairs, a leather portfolio open on her lap. Claire, thank you for coming promptly. Douglas gestured to an empty chair. This is Elaine Winters from Corporate Legal. My stomach dropped. Legal involvement meant this was serious, potentially termination-level serious. Before we begin, Elaine said, her voice professionally neutral, I want to clarify that this meeting is, informational, not disciplinary. We're trying to understand what happened Friday night and the events leading up to it. I sat up straighter. I'd be happy to explain. For the next 30 minutes, I recounted everything. Finding Sophie outside, learning she'd been deliberately excluded, the pattern of marginalization I'd observed over my 3 years at Silverpine. I mentioned Marcus's emails, but was careful not to overstate what evidence might exist. Douglas listened with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between concern and calculation. What troubles me, he finally said when I finished, is not that you brought Sophie inside, that was commendable, but that you chose to make a public scene rather than addressing the issue privately. With all due respect, Mr. Grant, private conversations haven't worked. Sophie and others have been systematically excluded for years while Silverpine talks about being a family. I met his gaze directly. Sometimes problems need to be made visible before they can be solved. Elaine made a note in her portfolio. Ms. Monroe, are you aware of any other instances of discriminatory behavior at Silverpine? The question hung in the air. This was the moment. I could either retreat to safety or step fully into the role I'd inadvertently claimed Friday night. Yes, I said firmly. And I believe other employees would corroborate if given the opportunity to speak without fear of retaliation. Douglas's jaw tightened, but Elaine nodded. That's precisely what we need to determine. The company is initiating a formal investigation into workplace culture and potential discriminatory practices. Investigation? I echoed, surprised. The board was contacted over the weekend, Douglas explained, a hint of resentment in his tone. Several members expressed concern about potential liability issues after learning about Friday's incident. Translation: someone from the party had connections to the board and had raised alarms. The threat of legal action or bad publicity had done what moral arguments couldn't: forced accountability. We'll be conducting interviews with all departments over the coming weeks, Elaine continued. In the meantime, Janet Avery has been placed on administrative leave, and we're reviewing the event planning processes to ensure inclusivity going forward. As the meeting concluded, Douglas asked me to stay behind. Once Elaine left, his carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. Claire, we've worked together for 3 years. I thought we had an understanding about how things operate here. I understood perfectly, I replied. That's the problem. His eyes narrowed. You've put me in a difficult position. The board is watching closely now, demanding results. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. He sighed, suddenly looking older than his 60 years. I built this company from nothing, Claire. Everything I've done has been to ensure its success. Success for whom? I asked quietly. Because from where I stand, a truly successful company values all its employees, not just the ones who look or act a certain way. When I returned to my desk, I found a small crowd gathered around it, Sophie, Marcus, and several others from departments throughout the building. What happened? Sophie asked anxiously. I told them about the investigation, watching hope and skepticism battle across their faces. Do you really think anything will change? Asked Raj from IT, who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times despite his exceptional qualifications. I don't know, I admitted. But what I do know is that silence doesn't work. We've all been silent for too long. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I've been compiling documentation for months. Emails, meeting notes, promotion patterns. I was too afraid to do anything with it until I saw you stand up for Sophie. Same here, added Leslie from accounting. I've kept a record of every time Janet made a comment about my ethnic lunches or suggested I change my accent to sound more American. One by one, they shared their stories, small indignities and major injustices that had gone unreported out of fear or resignation. The pattern was clear. Silverpine had cultivated a culture where certain employees were valued and others were merely tolerated. So what do we do now? Sophie asked. We speak up, I said simply. All of us. Together. When Elaine interviews you, tell your truth. Bring your documentation. Support each other. As they dispersed, I noticed a text from my husband. Why is HR from your company calling me? My heart sank. The investigation was clearly going to be thorough, which meant my personal life might be scrutinized as well. David and I had been sleeping in separate bedrooms for months. Our marriage existing primarily on paper and for the sake of our teenagers. We'd told no one at work about our struggles. I texted back, long story. I'll explain tonight. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous energy and quiet conversations. People who had never spoken to me before stopped by my desk with whispered thanks or shared confidences. Others avoided eye contact entirely, clearly, uncomfortable with the disruption to the status quo. By 5 o'clock, I was emotionally exhausted but strangely energized. Something had been set in motion that couldn't be easily contained or dismissed. As I packed up to leave, Sophie appeared at my cubicle again. I never told you exactly what happened when I tried to enter the party, she said, her voice steady but quiet. Janet didn't just turn me away. She said, people like you don't belong here. Know your place. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Sophie, I'm so sorry. Don't be. For years, I've been trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable, thinking that was the path to acceptance. Her eyes met mine, clear and determined. But you showed me something different. Sometimes being seen, really seen, is the first step toward change. As I drove home through the darkening Minneapolis streets, her words echoed in my mind. Being seen. It was what we all wanted ultimately. To be acknowledged, valued, included. 6 words had started something. You left her in the snow. Now it was time to see it through. The investigation moved with surprising speed. By Wednesday, temporary cubicles had been set up in the conference rooms, staffed by members of Elaine's team conducting confidential interviews. Employees were called in alphabetically, each emerging with expressions ranging from relief to anxiety. My own interview lasted nearly 2 hours. I provided names, dates, specific incidents I'd witnessed or experienced. The interviewer, a young man with kind eyes and rapid typing skills, asked thorough, detailed questions that suggested they were building a comprehensive picture of Silver Pine's culture. "We've heard your name mentioned frequently," he said toward the end. "Many employees cite you as someone who sees them when others don't." The observation caught me off guard. I'd always considered myself a bystander, not an ally, at least until Friday night. "I should have spoken up sooner," I admitted. He smiled slightly. Better late than never. As the week progressed, the office atmosphere transformed. Small groups gathered in break rooms and hallways, sharing stories previously kept hidden. Invisible barriers between departments began dissolving as people recognized shared experiences. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Several executives from Douglas's inner circle moved through the office with tight expressions, clearly uncomfortable with the shifting power dynamics. Whispers about troublemakers and overreaction occasionally reached my ears. Thursday afternoon, my desk phone rang again. "Claire, it's Elaine Winters. Do you have a moment to stop by conference room C?" When I arrived, I found not only Elaine but also 3 people I recognized as board members, including Chairwoman Patricia Voss, known for her no-nonsense approach to corporate governance. "Please, sit down," Patricia said, gesturing to an empty chair. "We've been reviewing the preliminary findings of our investigation, and your name appears consistently throughout the testimonies." My mouth went dry. "I hope I haven't overstepped." "Quite the contrary," Elaine interrupted. "You've helped expose issues that should have been addressed long ago." Patricia leaned forward. "Ms. Monroe, what we're seeing is a pattern of systematic exclusion and favoritism that goes beyond individual bad actors. It appears to be embedded in Silver Pine's operational culture." I nodded slowly. "That matches my experience. The question now," said Thomas Chen, another board member, "is how to address it meaningfully. Cosmetic changes won't be sufficient." Patricia tapped her pen against the table. "We're forming a workplace culture committee to develop concrete recommendations for structural change. Given your unique position and the trust you've established with employees across departments, we'd like you to co-chair it." The offer stunned me. "I'm just an HR analyst." "You're considerably more than that," Patricia replied. "You're someone who saw an injustice and refused to look away. That's precisely the quality we need leading this effort." As I left the meeting, my mind reeling with possibilities and responsibilities, I nearly collided with Douglas Grant in the hallway. "I heard about your new appointment," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied, searching his face for signs of resentment or anger. Instead, I found something unexpected: resignation, perhaps even relief. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "I started this company 30 years ago with 3 employees in a basement office. We were outsiders then, fighting to be taken seriously. Somewhere along the way, I think I forgot what that felt like." The admission surprised me. "It's not too late to remember." He nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps not. The board has asked me to consider transitioning to chairman emeritus by year's end. A chance to step back," they said. "And how do you feel about that?" Honestly, a rueful smile crossed his face. Terrified, and maybe a little relieved. Building something is different from maintaining it. Maybe it's time for new perspectives. That evening, as I shared the day's developments with Sophie over coffee at the small cafe across from our building, she seemed both excited and apprehensive. "It's all happening so fast," she marveled. "A week ago, I was nobody. Now people actually know my name." "You were never nobody," I corrected her. "You were just surrounded by people who couldn't see your value." She stirred her latte thoughtfully. "The committee Patricia mentioned. Who will co-chair it with you?" "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," I said. "I suggested your name." Her eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just—" "Don't say just anything," I interrupted gently. "You're brilliant, compassionate, and you understand firsthand what needs to change. Plus, you bring a perspective I don't have." "What do you mean?" "Sophie, I was invited to that party. You weren't. I've been given opportunities others haven't. I need someone beside me who sees the blind spots I might miss." She was quiet for a long moment, turning the idea over in her mind. "Do you really think I could do it?" "I know you can." The question is, do you want to? Her answer came slowly but with growing conviction. Yes. Yes, I think I do. As we walked back to the parking garage together, snow beginning to fall in delicate flakes around us, I realized how much had changed in just a few days. Not just at Silverpine, but within myself. For years, I'd moved through life with my head down, grateful for scraps of security, avoiding risks. Finding Sophie in the snow had cracked something open, not just organizational culture, but my own carefully constructed walls. Claire, Sophie said as we reached our cars, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't gone outside that night? I considered the question, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. I'd like to think someone else would have spoken up eventually. But it was you, she said simply. 6 words that changed. Everything. As I drove home through the snowy streets, I thought about the power of those words. Not because they were particularly eloquent or revolutionary, but because they named a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Sometimes that's all it takes to start an avalanche. One person willing to say what everyone else sees but fears to acknowledge. And sometimes that person turns out to be you. The formation of the Workplace Culture Committee was announced company-wide the following Monday. The email, sent directly from the board, stated our mandate in clear terms: to examine existing structures and recommend comprehensive changes that will ensure Silverpine becomes a truly inclusive workplace where all employees can thrive. Sophie and I were officially named as co-chairs, with 8 additional members representing various departments and levels, including Marcus from finance and, surprisingly, Douglas Grant himself. Having Douglas on the committee feels strange, Sophie confessed as we prepared for our first meeting. Like inviting the fox to help redesign the henhouse. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe it's an opportunity for him to see things differently. Either way, the board insisted on his involvement. Something about institutional knowledge. The conference room felt different that afternoon, charged with possibility. As everyone settled around the table, I noticed a shift in how people positioned themselves. Previously silent employees now leaned forward, ready to contribute, while some of the more vocal executives seemed tentative, uncertain of their place in this new configuration. Thank you all for being here, I began. Before we dive into agenda items, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is uncomfortable territory for many of us. We're examining systems that some of us have benefited from and others have been harmed by. That discomfort is part of the process. Sophie nodded, taking over seamlessly. Our goal isn't to point fingers or assign blame. It's to build something better. A workplace where talent and contribution matter more than connections or appearances. Douglas shifted in his seat, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words surprised me. I founded Silverpine with a vision of creating opportunity, he said quietly. Somewhere along the way, we narrowed our definition of who deserved that opportunity. I'm here to listen and learn how we can do better. The sincerity in his voice was unexpected. Whether it was genuine remorse or political savvy, I couldn't tell. But his acknowledgement set a tone of possibility rather than defensiveness. Over the next 3 hours, we mapped out areas for examination: hiring practices, promotion criteria, event planning, mentorship opportunities, compensation transparency. Each committee member took responsibility for gathering data in specific areas, with a 2-week deadline for preliminary findings. As the meeting concluded, Douglas asked to speak with Sophie and me privately. Once the others had filed out, he closed the conference room door and turned to face us. I owe you both an apology, he said without preamble. Particularly you, Sophie. What happened at the lodge was inexcusable, and while I didn't directly order your exclusion, I created a culture where Janet felt empowered to make those decisions. Sophie's eyes widened slightly, but her voice remained steady. Thank you for acknowledging that. I'm not looking for forgiveness, he continued, just the opportunity to help fix what I've broken. He looked directly at me. Claire, when you said those words at the party about leaving her in the snow, it was like seeing my company through new eyes, not flattering ones. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategic positioning. Instead, I saw something I recognized from my own mirror: the weariness of maintaining appearances, of living with compromises that slowly erode your sense of self. Actions speak louder than words, I said finally. Let's see where this goes. After he left, Sophie exhaled slowly. Do you believe him? I'm not sure, I admitted, but I think he believes himself, which is a start. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of interviews, data analysis, and late nights. The committee's work revealed patterns more troubling than even I had suspected. significant pay disparities between demographically similar positions, promotion rates that correlated strongly with participation in optional after-hours events, hiring decisions influenced by personal connections rather than qualifications. Marcus's financial analysis proved particularly illuminating. He'd tracked compensation across departments and discovered that back office roles, predominantly filled by women and people of color, had seen minimal salary increases over 5 years, while client-facing positions had enjoyed substantial growth. "It's not just about the holiday party," he explained during our third committee meeting, projecting charts onto the screen. "That was just a symptom of a deeper problem. We've created 2 silver pines, one visible, celebrated, and rewarded, the other invisible, taken for granted, and undervalued." Douglas, to his credit, didn't attempt to defend these findings. Instead, he asked questions, took notes, and occasionally offered historical context that helped us understand how certain practices had evolved. Meanwhile, the broader company culture was already shifting. Janet Avery had officially resigned, citing personal reasons. The invisible barriers between departments began dissolving as people shared lunches and formed cross-functional project teams. Even the physical space changed. The executive floor, once accessible only by special keycard, was now open to all employees. My personal life, however, remained in limbo. David and I had finally acknowledged that our marriage had been over for years, existing only on paper. We'd begun discussing separation terms, trying to minimize disruption for our teenagers. The conversations were painful but necessary, another truth finally being spoken after too long in silence. One evening, as Sophie and I worked late finalizing our preliminary recommendations, she noticed my distraction. "Everything okay?" she asked. "You seem somewhere else tonight." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "David and I are separating. It's been coming for a long time, but making it official is harder than I expected." "I'm sorry," she said, genuine concern in her voice. "That's a lot to handle on top of everything else." In a strange way, what's happening here at Silver Pine gave me the courage to face what wasn't working at home, I admitted. "Once you start speaking difficult truths, it becomes harder to live with comfortable lies." She nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that. After the party, I finally told my parents I don't want to be an accountant like they planned. I'm applying to graduate programs in data science instead." "Sophie, that's wonderful. Why didn't you tell me?" She smiled. "You've had enough on your plate. Besides, it's still sinking in for me, the idea that I can choose my own path without apologizing for it." As we returned to our work, I reflected on how the ripples from that night continued to spread, changing not just our workplace, but our sense of what was possible in our lives. 2 weeks later, we presented our findings and recommendations to the full board. The conference room was packed, with additional chairs brought in to accommodate everyone. Patricia Voss sat at the head of the table, her expression alert and engaged. Sophie and I had agreed to divide the presentation, with committee members contributing specific sections. As I watched Sophie deliver the opening remarks, confident, articulate, passionate, I felt a surge of pride. The woman who had once made herself invisible was now commanding attention, her value impossible to ignore. Our recommendations were comprehensive: transparent promotion criteria, mandatory inclusion in company events for all employees, revised compensation structures, mentorship programs, anonymous reporting channels for concerns, regular culture audits. Implementing these changes will require significant investment, both financial and cultural, I explained during my portion. But the cost of continuing as we have been is far greater. "How so?" asked one board member, a recent addition I didn't know well. "We're losing talent we don't even recognize we have," I replied. "People like Sophie who generate exceptional value but aren't seen or rewarded for it. That's not just unfair. It's bad business." Douglas spoke up then, surprising everyone. "Claire's right. I've spent the last month reviewing performance metrics across departments. Some of our highest performing employees have been systematically overlooked because they don't fit a certain profile or participate in our informal networks." Patricia nodded, making notes. When all presentations concluded, she addressed the room. "The board will need time to review these recommendations in detail. But speaking personally, I'm impressed by the thoroughness of your analysis and the clarity of your vision." She looked directly at Sophie and me. "Whatever specific changes we implement, one thing is clear. Silver Pine is already transforming thanks to your courage in speaking up." As the meeting adjourned, people gathered in small groups discussing implications and possibilities. Douglas approached Sophie and me, looking both tired and determined. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said, about legacy, about what kind of company I want to leave behind. I started Silverpine to create opportunity. It's time we expanded our definition of who deserves that opportunity. What are you saying? Sophie asked. I'm saying I fully support these recommendations, and I'm prepared to use whatever influence I still have to ensure they're implemented. He hesitated, then added quietly, some truths are hard to hear, but once heard, impossible to ignore. As he walked away, Sophie turned to me with a mixture of hope and wariness in her eyes. Do you think he means it? Do you think any of this will really change? I looked around at the energy in the room, the animated conversations, the new connections forming, the sense of possibility hanging in the air. Some of it already has, I said. The rest is up to us. Spring came to Minneapolis, melting away the last remnants of that brutal winter. Outside my office window, trees that had stood stark and bare now burst with tender green leaves, a visible reminder that renewal follows even the harshest seasons. 3 months had passed since the night at the ski lodge. 3 months of committee meetings, policy revisions, heated debates, and gradual transformation. Some changes had been immediate and symbolic, like renaming the executive floor the Innovation Center and making it a collaborative space open to all. Others were structural and slower to implement. Revised compensation frameworks, transparent eyes, promotion criteria, new mentorship programs. Not everyone embraced the changes. 2 senior executives had resigned rather than adapt to the new culture. Several others initially resisted, but gradually came around as they witnessed positive results. Increased collaboration, innovative solutions emerging from previously overlooked employees, a more energized workplace. Douglas had surprised us all by becoming one of the most vocal advocates for change. Whether driven by genuine conviction or a desire to salvage his legacy, he threw himself into the transformation process with unexpected passion. He'd announced his official retirement as CEO, effective year-end, but remained deeply involved in the transition planning. The search committee has narrowed down CEO candidates to 3 finalists, he told me during our weekly check-in. All external candidates with strong records of inclusive leadership. No internal candidates? I asked, curious about the decision. He smiled ruefully. We agreed a fresh perspective would be valuable. Too much institutional history can sometimes be a liability when you're trying to fundamentally change course. I nodded, understanding the wisdom in that approach. And the board is supportive? Completely. Patricia has been particularly impressed with the early results of our initiatives. Employee satisfaction scores are up 12% in just 1 quarter. The metrics told a compelling story. Decreased turnover, increased cross-departmental collaboration, and a surge in innovative proposals from previously silent employees. The business case for inclusion was writing itself in real time. My own role had evolved as well. After co-chairing the Culture Committee, I'd been offered a newly created position, Director of Workplace Equity and Inclusion. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, a team of 3, and a seat at the leadership table. Sophie, meanwhile, had been promoted to Data Analytics Manager while pursuing her graduate studies part-time. Claire, Douglas said as our meeting concluded, there's something else I wanted to discuss. The annual company celebration is coming up next month. I tensed slightly at the mention. The memory of finding Sophie shivering in the snow remained vivid. We're doing things differently this year, he continued, noting my reaction. The planning committee is diverse. Representatives from every department, every level. The event will be held at the Minneapolis Botanical Gardens, accessible to everyone. No private ski lodges, no exclusivity. That sounds positive, I acknowledged. We'd like you to say a few words about the journey we've been on, about what's changed and what still needs to. The request caught me off guard. I'm not sure I'm the right person. This hasn't been about me. Hasn't it, though? At least in part, he asked gently. You found Sophie that night. You spoke those 6 words that started everything. Your voice matters in this story. I promised to consider it, though the idea of standing before the entire company made my stomach tighten. Later that afternoon, Sophie appeared at my office door, a data tablet in hand. Got a minute? I've been analyzing the results from our first round of anonymous feedback surveys. She'd grown more confident over the past months, standing taller, speaking more assertively, letting her natural intelligence shine without apology. We'd become friends beyond our professional relationship, supporting each other through the challenges of change. What did you find? I asked, clearing space. On my desk. Mostly positive, especially from lower-level employees. They're feeling heard, included, valued. She swiped through several charts. There's still skepticism from some quarters, people wondering if this is just temporary window dressing. But overall, the trajectory is encouraging. And what about you? I asked. How are you feeling about everything? She set down the tablet, considering the question seriously. Sometimes I still can't believe it. 3 months ago, I was contemplating leaving Silver Pine altogether. Now I'm leading projects I care about, studying what fascinates me, being recognized for my contributions. She smiled. And I bought myself a really good winter coat. The small joke carried weight, a reminder of where this journey had begun. Douglas asked me to speak at the company celebration, I told her, about what's changed since that night. You should do it, she said immediately. Your words started this. They should be part of marking how far we've come. I'm not comfortable being positioned as some kind of hero. I just did what anyone should have done. But that's the point, Claire. Anyone could have, but no one did. Until you. She leaned forward, earnest. Do you know what I remember most about that night? Not the cold, not Janet's dismissal, not even Douglas's fake apology. I remember standing beside you in that doorway, watching people see me, really see me, for the first time, all because you refused to stay silent. Her words stayed with me as I drove home that evening to my new apartment. The separation from David had been finalized, our house sold, proceeds divided. The teenagers split their time between us, adjusting to the new arrangement with the resilience of youth. The small 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the river felt more like home than the suburban house ever had, a space that reflected my choices, not my compromises. As I prepared dinner, my phone pinged with a text from Marcus. Committee happy, away. Hour tomorrow? We have something to celebrate. I smiled, curious about the cryptic message. The group that had formed around the culture committee had become something of a family, supporting each other through professional and personal challenges, celebrating small victories along the way. The next evening, I found them gathered at our usual table at Riverside Brewing. Marcus stood as I approached, grinning broadly. What's the occasion? I asked, sliding into an empty chair. 2 things, he announced. First, the board unanimously approved our full slate of recommendations this afternoon, including the budget for implementation. A cheer went up around the table. This was significant, moving from theoretical support to financial commitment. And second, Marcus continued, producing a folder with flourish. Our analysis of salary inequities has resulted in immediate adjustments for 37 employees, effective next pay period. He passed the folder to Sophie, who opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter detailing a substantial salary correction, backdated 6 months. This isn't just about money, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It's about value, about recognizing what I contribute. As glasses clinked and conversations flowed around me, I felt something unfamiliar, a sense of purpose fulfilled, of meaningful impact. For years, I'd moved through life and work as a spectator, careful not to disrupt, grateful for whatever security I could maintain. Finding Sophie in the snow had awakened something dormant. Not just courage, but connection. The recognition that silence in the face of injustice damages not only its victims, but also those who remain quiet. 6 words had started something that grew beyond any individual. 6 words that named a truth too long ignored. You left her in the snow. And in naming that truth, we'd begun to thaw something frozen within ourselves and our workplace, creating space for new growth, new possibilities, new connections. Sometimes the most powerful act is simply to see what's before you and to say it aloud. The Minneapolis Botanical Gardens transformed for Silver Pine's annual celebration. Strings of lights twinkled among the flowering pathways, creating a magical atmosphere that felt worlds away from last year's exclusive ski lodge. Employees from every department mingled freely, the artificial hierarchies that once defined our interactions noticeably absent. I stood near the entrance, watching people arrive. Some I'd known for years but only recently truly seen. Others who had emerged from invisibility to become vital voices in our transformed company. My navy blue dress felt comfortable, chosen for myself rather than to impress anyone else. Nervous about your speech? Sophie appeared beside me, elegant in a deep red dress, the same color as the coat she'd bought herself after that night, a personal symbol of her transformation. Terrified, I admitted. Public speaking isn't exactly my strength. Just speak the truth, she said simply. It's worked well for you so far. The evening unfolded with a natural warmth that previous corporate events had lacked. The catering featured diverse options that honored the various cultural backgrounds of our employees. The music represented multiple genres and eras. Even the seating was arranged to encourage conversation across departments and levels. No VIP tables, no exclusive sections. Douglas moved through the crowd with an ease I hadn't seen before, less the untouchable CEO, more a steward preparing to pass the torch. When our eyes met across the room, he nodded respectfully, acknowledging the journey we'd traveled together. Patricia Voss, the board chairwoman, opened the formal portion of the evening with characteristic directness. A year ago, Silverpine was a company living a contradiction, claiming to value all employees while systematically excluding many. Tonight, we celebrate not just another successful fiscal year, but a fundamental transformation in who we are and how we operate. She outlined the concrete changes implemented over the past months. The revised compensation structure that had corrected historical inequities, the transparent promotion criteria that had already resulted in advancement for previously overlooked talent, the inclusive event planning that ensured everyone felt welcome and valued. These changes haven't just been morally right. They've been good business, she continued, gesturing toward screens displaying key metrics. Employee satisfaction up 20%. Innovation submissions increased by 35%. Turnover decreased by half. When people feel valued, they contribute their best. As applause rippled through the garden, Patricia introduced Douglas. He approached the microphone with humility that would have been unimaginable a year ago. For 30 years, I've defined myself as the founder and leader of Silverpine, he began. I took pride in building something substantial, something that created opportunity. What I failed to recognize was how narrowly I defined that opportunity, and who deserved access to it. He spoke candidly about his journey from resistance to recognition, from defensiveness to responsibility. Finding a colleague left out in the cold, literally and figuratively, forced me to see what my leadership had created. Not the meritocracy I imagined, but a system of insiders and outsiders determined by factors that had nothing to do with talent or contribution. My chest tightened as he referenced. That night, the memory still vivid despite the months that had passed. As I prepare to step away from leadership, I'm more proud of the changes we've made in these past months than many of my previous achievements. Because a company isn't buildings or balance sheets, it's people. All its people. He ended by introducing the incoming CEO, Dr. Amara Jackson, a respected business leader known for building inclusive organizations. Her appointment had been announced the previous week to widespread approval. As she took the microphone, her presence commanded attention. Confident, warm, visionary. I'm honored to join a company in the midst of such meaningful transformation, she said. The work you've begun isn't just changing Silverpine. It's creating a model other organizations can learn from. She outlined her vision for continuing the progress, emphasizing that inclusion wasn't a project with an endpoint, but an ongoing commitment requiring vigilance and humility. And now, she concluded, I'd like to invite Claire Monroe to share her perspective. As many of you know, Claire played a pivotal role in catalyzing the changes we're celebrating tonight. My heart hammered as I made my way to the front. Public speaking had never been my strength, and standing before the entire company felt exposing in ways I hadn't anticipated. But as I took my place at the microphone and looked out at the gathered faces, Sophie's encouraging smile, Marcus's subtle thumbs up, the attentive eyes of colleagues new and old, I found my voice. A year ago, I was an HR analyst who kept her head down, and stayed quiet. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I saw problems but told myself they weren't mine to solve. I witnessed exclusion but convinced myself I couldn't change it. I benefited from a system that elevated some while diminishing others, and I accepted that as just how things were. The garden was silent, everyone listening intently. Then one night I found my colleague Sophie, sitting alone in the snow, deliberately excluded from a celebration happening just feet away. The contrast was so stark, so undeniable. Warmth and inclusion on one side of a door, cold rejection on the other. I looked directly at Sophie, acknowledging her courage that night and every day since. 6 words came to me then. You left her in the snow. Simple words, obvious words. But sometimes, naming what everyone can see but no one will say is the most powerful act possible. I spoke about the journey since, not just the policy changes and structural reforms, but the deeper transformation in how we related to one another. How making space for previously silenced voices had enriched our work and our workplace. How courage proved contagious, with one person's willingness to speak, inspiring others to do the same. The lesson I've learned isn't that speaking up once changes everything, I concluded. It's that change requires persistent truth-telling, uncomfortable conversations, and genuine willingness to see beyond our own experience. It's ongoing work that belongs to all of us. I returned to my seat amid warm applause, relieved to have the speech behind me. As the formal program concluded and music filled the garden again, colleagues approached with kind words and shared reflections. Some had stories of their own transformations over the past year. Others expressed renewed faith in what Silverpine could become. Later, as the evening wound down, I found a quiet moment alone in the rose garden, breathing in the fragrant air. The path ahead wouldn't be perfect. Meaningful change never is. There would be setbacks, resistance, the constant pull of old habits. But something fundamental had shifted, both in our company and in myself. "There you are," Sophie said, joining me on the stone bench. "Hiding from your admirers?" I laughed. "Just catching my breath. It's been quite a year." "That it has." She looked out over the illuminated gardens, thoughtful. "I've been offered a position at Amara's former company, head of their data science division. More money, bigger team, impressive title." My heart sank despite my best efforts. "Are you going to take it?" "I'm not sure. A year ago, I would have jumped at it, desperate to escape somewhere I felt invisible. But now," she shrugged, "now I have reasons to stay. Work that matters. People who see me. Whatever you decide, you've earned it," I said sincerely. "But selfishly, I hope you stay." She smiled. "What about you? I heard Amara wants you on her executive leadership team." The offer had come yesterday. Vice President of People and Culture, a significant promotion with substantial responsibilities. "I'm still processing it," I admitted. "It's more visibility than I'm used to." "Being seen isn't so bad," Sophie said gently. "You taught me that." As we sat together in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey from that freezing night to this warm evening. The path hadn't been straight or simple. There had been resistance, setbacks, difficult conversations, but step by step, word by word, we'd created something different. A workplace where value wasn't determined by who you knew or how well you played politics, but by what you contributed. "Look," Sophie said suddenly, pointing toward the garden entrance. Janet Avery stood there, hesitant and out of place. After her resignation, she disappeared from our professional circles, reportedly taking a position with a smaller firm across town. Her presence tonight was unexpected and clearly uncomfortable. Without discussion, Sophie and I both stood and made our way toward her. "Janet," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "I didn't expect to see you tonight." She looked between us, tension evident in her posture. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome, but Douglas called, said it might be healing to see what Silverpine has become." An awkward silence stretched between us, years of history impossible to ignore. Finally, Sophie spoke. "Would you like to come in? Everyone is welcome tonight." The echo of that night, inclusion versus exclusion, warmth versus cold, hung in the air between us. Janet's eyes widened slightly, recognition and perhaps remorse flickering across her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'd like that." As we walked together into the celebration, I realized this too was part of transformation, not just structural changes or policy reforms, but the harder, more personal work of reconciliation, of creating space for people to grow beyond their worst moments. True inclusion wouldn't be measured by metrics or percentages, but by moments like this. When given the opportunity to exclude someone who had once excluded others, we chose a different path. 6 words had started our journey. "You left her in the snow." But it wouldn't end there. It would continue in the choices we made each day, in the cultures we built together, in the truths we were willing to speak and hear. And in that continuation lay the real transformation, not just of a company, but of ourselves. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my new office, watching Minneapolis prepare for winter. The first snow of the season drifted lazily past the glass, not yet the biting cold that would come, but a gentle reminder of the season's change. My title, Vice President of People and Culture, still felt somewhat strange, the nameplate on my door a daily surprise. The promotion had come with expected challenges. Longer hours, difficult decisions, the weight of responsibility for initiatives that affected everyone at Silverpine. But it had also brought unexpected joys. The ability to implement ideas I'd once only imagined, a platform to advocate for continued transformation, and the satisfaction of watching a healthier culture take root and flourish. A knock at my open door pulled me from my thoughts. Sophie stood there, tablet in hand, her confidence now as natural as breathing. The final numbers. "For the mentorship program's first year," she said, stepping into the office. "I thought you'd want to see them right away." She'd decided to stay at Silverpine, declining the external offer for what she called unfinished business. Now she led our newly formed data analytics division, her graduate studies completed with honors. The tentative woman I'd found shivering in the snow had been replaced by someone who owned her space, her voice, her value. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Good news or challenging news?" "Decidedly good," she replied, sliding the tablet toward me. 92% of participants report feeling more connected to career opportunities. 87% of mentees from historically marginalized groups have received promotions or expanded responsibilities. The numbers were impressive. Concrete evidence that intentional inclusion created tangible results. The mentorship program had been one of our first initiatives, pairing experienced employees with those who traditionally lacked access to informal networks and guidance. "Amara will be pleased," I said, referring to our CEO who had embraced and expanded the transformation agenda. "She's meeting with the board this afternoon." Sophie nodded. "They'd be fools not to be impressed. The company's performance metrics are stronger across every dimension." She was right. The past year had seen Silverpine's productivity, innovation, and profitability increase substantially. The business case for inclusion was writing itself in real time, silencing the few remaining skeptics who'd viewed our efforts as merely symbolic. "Speaking of the board," Sophie continued, "I heard Patricia is stepping down as chairwoman." "At the end of the year," I confirmed. "She's recommending Douglas as her replacement." "Full circle," Sophie mused. "From CEO who enabled exclusion to board chair championing transformation." Douglas's journey had been perhaps the most surprising element of the past year. After stepping down as CEO, he'd thrown himself into learning, listening, and supporting the changes sweeping through the company he'd founded. His humility had been genuine, his commitment to making amends sincere. "People can change when they're willing to see differently," I said. "Not everyone, not always, but sometimes." My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Final planning for the year-end celebration, now just 2 weeks away. This year's event would be held at the city's Contemporary Art Museum, another inclusive venue selected to reinforce our commitment to accessibility. "I should go," Sophie said, rising. "I'm meeting with the planning committee in 10 minutes. "Before you leave," I said, "I wanted to ask a favor. The foundation mentorship program we're launching next month for high school students. Would you consider being a keynote speaker at the orientation? Your journey would resonate with many of them." The Silverpine Foundation had been established 6 months ago, extending our internal transformation into the broader community. The mentorship initiative would connect promising students from underserved neighborhoods with professional development, opportunities they might otherwise never access. Sophie hesitated. "You know, public speaking isn't my favorite activity." "I remember someone telling me that being seen isn't so bad," I replied, echoing her words from a year ago. "You taught me that." She laughed, shaking her head. "Using my own words against me. Unfair advantage." Then more seriously, "I'll do it. If my story helps even one student see possibilities they couldn't before, it's worth the stage fright." After she left, I returned to the window, watching the snow accumulate on the streets below. My thoughts drifted to Janet Avery, who had recently reached out after a year of silence. Our conversation over coffee had been uncomfortable but necessary, her acknowledgement of past behavior neither excused nor dismissed, but recognized as part of a larger system she'd both benefited from and perpetuated. "I've been doing a lot of reflection," she'd said, fingers wrapped tightly around her mug, "about power, about who I included and excluded, about the kind of leader I was." She'd paused, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm trying to do better in my new role. It's harder than I expected. Unlearning habits, recognizing blind spots." The humility in her voice had been genuine, her journey clearly still unfolding. We'd parted not as friends exactly, but as people who recognized each other's humanity, the capacity for both harm and growth that exists in all of us. My reflection in the window caught me by surprise. The confidence in my posture, the ease in my expression so different from the woman who had once kept her head down, afraid to disrupt. Finding Sophie that night had changed not just Silverpine, but my understanding of my own voice and power. A text message pulled me back to the present, a reminder from Marcus about our monthly lunch. Another friendship that had deepened through our shared commitment to transformation. He'd recently been promoted to Chief Financial Officer, using his analytical mind and quiet integrity to ensure our values were reflected in our financial decisions. As I gathered my coat and prepared to meet him, my phone rang. Amara, calling from the boardroom. "Claire," she said when I answered, her voice vibrant with energy. "The board just unanimously approved the expansion of all our inclusion initiatives for the coming year, including a 20% increase in the foundation's budget." "That's fantastic news," I replied, genuinely excited. The foundation's work had already created meaningful opportunities for dozens of students and community members. "There's more," Amara continued. "They've approved the publication of our transformation case study. Other companies have been asking how we've achieved such significant results. Now we can share the blueprint." The idea that our journey might influence other organizations, creating ripples of change beyond our own walls, felt like the fulfillment of something that had begun with 6 simple words on a snowy night. When I met Marcus for lunch, the small cafe was warm and inviting, a welcome contrast to the increasingly blustery day outside. He was already seated at our usual table, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some document. "Sorry I'm late," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Good news from the board meeting held me up." He smiled, removing his glasses. "I heard. Amara called me right after you. It's remarkable how far we've come in such a short time. Sometimes it feels like we've barely begun," I admitted. "There's still so much to do." "True," he acknowledged. "But it's worth pausing to recognize the distance traveled." He gestured around the cafe, where several Silver Pine employees from different departments sat together, engaged in animated conversation. A year ago, those people wouldn't even have known each other's names. He was right. The transformation wasn't just in policies or metrics, but in everyday interactions. The dissolved barriers, the expanded circles, the genuine connections forming across previous divisions. "I've been thinking about that night," I said, my mind returning to the ski lodge, about Sophie in the snow, about what might have happened if I hadn't gone outside at that exact moment. Marcus considered this, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Someone else might have found her, or no one might have. She might have given up and gone home, carrying that rejection with her. The pattern might have continued indefinitely. He looked at me directly. "But that's not what happened. You saw what others chose not to see. You named what others left unspoken." "It wasn't heroic," I insisted. "It was just human." "Perhaps that's the point," he replied. "Transformation doesn't require heroism, just humanity. The pirate willingness to see each other fully and speak truth when it matters." As we finished lunch and prepared to return to the office, the snow outside had intensified, transforming the city into a winter tableau. Marcus and I walked together, our footprints marking the freshly fallen snow. "The year-end celebration is almost here," he remarked. "Hard to believe it's been a full year since everything changed." "A beginning, not an end," I said, thinking of all that remained to be done. The ongoing work of creating a truly inclusive culture, the constant vigilance required to prevent sliding backward, the commitment to extending transformation beyond our walls. Back at my office, I found an envelope on my desk, cream-colored, my name handwritten on the front. Inside was a card containing a single photograph. Sophie and me at last year's botanical garden celebration, both smiling, both standing tall. A note in Sophie's distinctive handwriting read, "1 year ago, you taught me that being seen is the first step toward change. Today, I'm grateful not just for being seen, but for learning to truly see others. The transformation continues in our company, in our community, in ourselves. Thank you," for those 6 words that started everything. I placed the card on my desk where I could see it daily, a reminder of where we'd begun and how far we'd come. Outside my window, Minneapolis disappeared into swirling snow. The boundary between earth and sky blurred into whiteness. Winter had returned as it always did. But this time, no one at Silver Pine would be left out in the cold. 6 words had named a truth too long ignored. You left her in the snow. And in naming that truth, we'd begun a transformation that continued to unfold, in policy changes and personal growth, in structural reforms and human connections, in the company we were building and the people we were becoming. The work wasn't finished. Perhaps it never would be. But as I watched the snow fall on a city being slowly transformed, I understood that was precisely the point. Transformation isn't a destination but a journey, one that begins with seeing clearly, speaking truthfully, and continuing forward together, one step at a time, through whatever weather comes.